Hello and welcome. This is a public affairs forum sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther L. Information about the forums is available on our church website, that is austinuu.org. One of our forum committee members, Eric Hartman, will be introducing our speaker. Eric.
Thank you, Luther. It is truly my honor to introduce the Honorable Eddie Rodriguez, State Representative from District 51. In his case, the honorific has been well earned. He is a state representative who takes public service very seriously and has demonstrated that in the 7 terms he's already served, now heading into his 8th term in the Texas House of Representatives. His background has helped him to be one of the, in my view, savviest operators at the Capitol, understanding how the place works, based on a history as first executive director of the Travis County Democratic Party, then stint as chief of staff for former state representative Glenn Maxey, somebody who really knows what it takes to pass legislation, what it takes to stop bad legislation, and both of those talents will come into service during this coming legislative session. We're going to see, we know already, a radical agenda coming out of the Texas Senate. How far that agenda proceeds will depend on folks in the Texas House like Eddie Rodriguez. So we're counting on him to help us understand what this situation how this situation will play out. His own legislative interests include a wide variety of concerns important to his district and to the whole state: economic development, jobs, housing, education, hunger and nutrition, health and human services, environmental concerns, just a few items on that agenda. So he will be in the thick of that House-Senate conflict that I mentioned, but has insights about many other layers of the complexities of the Capitol that I think he will share with you. I'm looking forward greatly to his presentation, and please join me in welcoming Eddie Rodriguez.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Eric's a dear friend, someone I've known for a long time, and when he started telling stories about Glenn Maxey and my start when I was executive director of the Travis County Democratic Party well over 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now, I'm starting to feel the age on that. You know, that seemed like just yesterday when I got elected to the Texas House, but that was, in fact, about 15 years ago. So I'm so honored to be here. This, in fact, is my second time, I believe, being here speaking before you. The last time, I think, might have been after my freshman session or during my freshman session back in 2003, talking about tax policy. But again, as Eric said, my name's Eddie Rodriguez. I represent a district here in Austin, Texas. Just a little bit of background about me, and then we'll get into the meat of as much as I can talk about in about 30, 40 minutes about the legislature, but I want to leave it up to you guys to ask as many questions as possible. So I'm originally from McAllen, Texas. Like most Austinites, I'm not actually from here. I married an Austinite, but I moved here after I graduated high school from McAllen, Texas. I'm down in the valley, and I moved here after a short stint at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, and then I transferred here to UT back in 1991 and just simply fell in love with Austin, Texas, and just never looked back. So I've been here ever since, and really, you know, I had the political bug since I was quite young, probably in what we used to call junior high. I think it's middle school now, but anyway, it was junior high back when I was back in the valley, and just always been fascinated with the political process. And for me, it really began, I was probably about 12, maybe 13 years old, watching a documentary about Martin Luther King, and I was fascinated by it, and I just never looked back. I read a lot about, you know, the social justice and the changes that he made via the political process, via the social side of it, but then I was also fascinated by the politicians who kind of made those changes happen in the kind of the legislative process, and that's really what got me involved and interested in that at a pretty young age. My district is here in Austin. I represent South Central Austin, Central East Austin, in southeast Travis County. My district, and I know there's a couple of constituents here I've already said hi to, but my district is really very, very dynamic. So I have Dove Springs, which is incredibly low income, a lot of low income stuff. They have the flooding during the Halloween and Memorial Day floods and all that. But I also have Travis Heights and Bolden neighborhoods. It's a very, very fast changing district. Central East Austin, where I live, is extremely gentrified, and those other issues, we can talk about that if you all want to. But it's also, that's kind of a microcosm of Austin. I feel like my district has that. I have the airport, the Formula One racetrack where you have F1 racing, and then you just have a lot of poverty. And my district, however, is kind of also looks like Austin in many ways. My district is around 60% Hispanic. And most of the kids that go to the schools in my district qualify for free reduced lunch. So Austin is a very, and my district is a very dynamic city in that regard. And there's a lot of issues that we face, not only at the local level, but that we face to try to address those issues at the state level. So I want to just briefly talk about just being a minority and a double minority in the Texas House, right? So as a Hispanic member of the legislature, I'm also the vice chairman I'm also the policy chairman of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus. But as a Democrat in the legislature, I am also in the minority there, as many of you may know. But so I've gotten a little bit used to it. So all that really means is that I've just kind of figured out how to fight as hard as I can, and many Democrats have figured out how to do that on certain key issues that we care about. I do want to tell another just short story to give you an example of kind of the environment that we're in the Texas legislature right now. I consider myself a progressive Democrat. I would not describe I wouldn't use the word progressive to describe the Texas legislature, however. A bill that this was probably the most important bill I had last session. I mean, I tend to really hold on to my bills, and they're my babies. This one was really important to me because I've seen the difference it makes to our youth in school, and that is the community schools bill. So I'm not going to get into a great deal, but the idea behind community schools in a nutshell is to really have wraparound service, get parental involvement, get business involvement, have services on campuses, high school campuses, middle school campuses, to try to improve those schools as it pertains to test scores and graduation rates, et cetera, et cetera. So the bill I had was simply to really promote that model throughout the state. And as you may or may not know, the Texas Education Agency has the ability, the commissioner has the ability to shut down a school if it fails certain criteria over the course of 2 or 3 years. So what this bill said was essentially you can't shut a school down if they're trying to improve themselves via this model, essentially. And part of that is to have a kind of a community organization to be involved in coordinating a lot of the community coordinator to try to coordinate the parental involvement and the other pieces of it. Well, somewhere along the way, someone notified the lieutenant governor that this was just my way of getting Planned Parenthood into every school in the state of Texas, which I couldn't even in my wildest imagination figure out how you can make that stretch. But nonetheless, that was made, that terrible, crazy idea. So I had to spend a lot of time on the House floor to try to get it passed to the House, to get it to the Senate. In fact, I had to go to one of my Republican colleagues, someone that I have a lot of respect for, and say, I want you to file an amendment. And I actually handed it to my colleague and said, please file this amendment that says that Planned Parenthood has nothing to do with this bill. And I didn't like doing it because it didn't have anything to do with this bill. But just to move the ball forward, I had to do this to try to get it out. So sure enough, we got that amendment on, and we passed it out of the House, and then of course it died in the Senate. So that is the environment that we are in right now. So as of this beginning of this session, which just started last Tuesday, there's already been 1,500 bills filed. So people of my persuasion, we have basically two roles this session. And it hasn't been that different over the last several sessions, but it is working hard to try to pass as many good bills as possible. And then the other is basically trying to fight and kill as many bad bills as possible. And I would argue to you all that probably fighting and killing bad bills is more of a priority rather than the other. And I hate to say that as someone who likes to pass good laws, who thinks that our role should be to change laws for the better of as many Texans as possible. But in fact, sometimes trying to prevent really bad things from happening is the best that you can do. So now we're going to get into the meat of what's happening this session. So we are at just under 3%, at 2.7% less of a budget than we had 2 years ago. So we have less money now than we had 2 years ago, which always spells a lot of cuts in the budget, cuts in things that many of us in this room might think are very important. So we have about $104.8 billion, to spend in the next 2 years. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but we're also an extremely populous state. We have a lot of needs here, and 3% cut from, is a big deal. We do have about $12 billion in the rainy day fund, and basically that's kind of like our savings account. We use it under certain circumstances. We always kind of fight on when we should use that money. A lot of my colleagues are a bit more conservative on when they want to use that money, and a rainy day for some of us means one thing, and a rainy day for others means something completely different. Public education is going to be a very big issue, as it always is, but we did have a Supreme Court ruling just this past year that basically said that our schools are constitutional, right? We're funding them constitutionally, but the Supreme Court did not say we have the best public schools. In fact, our schools tend to be towards the bottom as far as funding and everything else. So I think we're going to try. I know the Speaker Strauss has mentioned that just merely being constitutionally acceptable is not enough. We need to really look at the future. And I've contended now for a long time that I think our next big civil rights fight is in public education. If you look at the state of Texas, we are now at 52% of students in our public schools are Latino. And if these are the same kids that are not graduating, they're not going to the best possible public school, they're not going to colleges, they're not ready for a career afterwards, that's not only bad for those young people and those families, but it's bad for the future of our state. So we need to look at education in a different way, and look at the fact that we finally have minority children that make up the majority of our public schools, and that at this time we shouldn't be cutting funding. We should in fact be increasing funding and doing it equitably. Healthcare is going to be a very big issue, as it always is. We have overall has one of the highest uninsured rates for children in the state of Texas at 11%. And if you're looking at Latino children, it's at 15%. So that's going to be a very big issue, as it always is. Of course, we've been hearing a lot about the Affordable Care Act and what might be happening in Washington, D.C., and that will undoubtedly have an impact. I mean, already we have a pretty high insured rate, here in Texas for Texas children. This can only make it worse if Obamacare is repealed. I did file a bill. I filed it. It's House Bill 224, which maintains the pre-existing condition component of the Affordable Care Act to make that state law, that if you're going to have insurance in Texas, that pre-existing condition is going to, that's maintained from the federal law. And also Child Protective Services is going to be very big. Back in December 15, a federal judge found that Texas violates the foster care children's constitutional rights to be free from unreasonable risk and harm. And I'm going to quote the judge here. Years of abuse, neglect, and shuttling between inappropriate placements across the state has created a population that cannot contribute to society and prove a continued strain on the government through welfare, incarceration, and otherwise. This is from the judge, a federal judge in Corpus Christi. So because of that, the Speaker has created a bipartisan working group of House members, of which I'm a part of, to discuss how we can revamp CPS, Child Protective Services. And I've been honored to be selected to be part of that group of Republicans and Democrats to figure out how we can deal with that. The Legislature and the governor has already said we're going to be increasing funding to raise pay for caseworkers, and that's a big part of it, but we're also going to be looking at a lot of other issues there. So that's one thing where you have some agreement right now, early on in session, that we have to address the CPS system. And already with some of my more conservative colleagues, we've sat down and we have some agreement on some major issues on that. So that's one kind of bright spot for sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my bills, and then I will go through that fairly quickly, and then some of the bad bills, and then I want to hear from you guys. That's kind of why I'm here. So as Eric mentioned, some of my priorities, one of my main priorities, I've also founded and chair the Texas House formed a table caucus, and that was about 5 or 6 years ago now. Seems like yesterday. And the idea behind the caucus is, for me, it's about food security. We have food deserts all over the state of Texas, and certainly in my district we have them. And people here, you all know what a food desert is, I'm guessing, right? It's when you're in a community, in a neighborhood, in an area of town you have a McDonald's near you, but you don't have a grocery store that has fresh produce, anything healthy for you to eat. So, and it's harder for people to get that. So it has to do. So for me, it was about food access. I have a lot of urban farms in my district, and so I talked to them. And so to me, how that started, I had dinner with a Republican colleague of mine, and over the course of that dinner, we didn't agree on anything whatsoever when it came to policy issues, except for when it came to food and farming, and the idea of organic farming, and the idea of self-sustaining farming. And it was just an amazing thing, and I had an epiphany that, we don't have enough that we agree on. Let's figure out how to do this. So that's kind of the background behind the Farm to Table Caucus, and we're about 30 strong, roughly 15 Republicans, 15 Democrats, and we're going to be working to grow that caucus. So one of the bills that I have is one bill that I filed now. This will be my third time trying. It's a grocery access bill, essentially having a program in place so that it would encourage grocery stores to open up in a certain part of town or a certain part of the state, give them an encouragement, whether it's monetary or some kind of tax benefit, to move in there. So, for example, in Dove Springs, for example, in my district, I can go to Dove Springs and have a neighborhood forum, and almost before they say public education is a priority or traffic is a priority, half the time I'll hear, I want an HEB by my house, because the nearest one is 5 miles from me. I don't have a car, or whatever. I mean, that's how important it is for some people. So this is a bill that I filed. This is my third time, as I said, and I'm going to go after it one more time. It's bipartisan to a degree, and it's a working group that's pretty stout. I mean, one of the main groups is the American Heart Association has been promoting this. So I'm going to try that again. We'll see how that works out this time. Also on that same front is, again, I mentioned that I have a lot of urban farms in my district. How many of you guys have heard of Boggy Creek Farm, Springdale Farm? Those are in my district. I have roughly, that's only 2 of about 10, and they're all over this. They're all over the city, and frankly, they're all over the state. Small urban farms or suburban farms, and they need some help. And so one of the things that I've done, again, trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together on this notion of taxes, right? So many of these farms, if you talk to the folks at Boggy Creek, for example, they don't pay the ag valuation of their property. They pay they pay property taxes like everyone else does, as if it was your home, essentially. So they pay a lot of taxes, although they're farming on just about all of it. And under normal circumstances, they would get the tax valuation, ag valuation, for that. So the problem has been that every county is a little bit different. Every county has kind of their ability to say, okay, you have to have a minimum of 12 acres or 20 acres, whatever it is. And state law kind of spells out broadly what you can do. You can have 1 cow for 10 acres or 5 acres or whatever it happens to be. But it kind of leaves it up to the locals to determine the ag valuation aspect of it. So what it has meant for these folks now, if you can find 12 acres in Austin, in the city of Austin, and afford to pay for it and then afford to farm on it, then more power to you, but that ain't going to happen, right? In Austin, Texas, property values are extremely expensive. If you have 5 acres, 3 acres, Boggy Creek, I think, is about 5, and so is Springdale, and they're close to downtown and all that stuff, they're going to be taxed a lot. And so this is a way for them to get the ag valuation. And for me, it's kind of 2 different things, right? I hear a lot of people, and that's in Central East Austin. I hear a lot of people complain about going to farmers markets and, like, why would I pay $5 for a head of lettuce? Well, a lot of the reason why the cost of going to a farmer's market is because they end up paying a lot more in taxes and whatnot. The idea being we can maybe go down on the price, make it more affordable for mid-low income folks, and just to give them the ability to do that, right? The ability for them to sell at a lower price. Plus, I just think it's the right thing to do. I'm going to work on the community schools bill again from last session. It may look a little bit different, but I'm going to push that again. Try to dispel any notion about Planned Parenthood or anything else, and we're just going to keep pushing that because it's the right thing to do. It's a proven model. It works. It's turned schools around. Reagan High School is a perfect example of that. Reagan was on the verge of closing. The state of Texas was going to shut that high school down, and now it started off as They went to a community schools model. Now it's an early college high school. 90% of the kids graduate from high school. It's a tremendous turnaround in a very short period of time, and it's because of this model. And so I'm going to push it. It's worth pushing. There are, of course, going to be some bad bills that we're going to be fighting. We have the DREAM Act. How many people know what the DREAM Act is? It allows for those that don't know that, it allows for young people whose parents immigrated from another country to the United States when they were young, and they've gone to school, they're made the top 10%, they're going to go to any college, or they don't have to make the top 10, whatever it is, they're going to go to college. That would allow them to pay in-state tuition, right? That's very simple. It's probably one of the very, very few things that Rick Perry did that I agree with. But that's what that was a Rick Perry deal, was to allow for these kids to pay in-state tuition, which is a huge deal. If we're talking about people going to college, young people and graduating, being a part of our economy, our society, this is a tremendous thing. There's been attempts to repeal this now for the last several sessions. We're looking at some more voter ID, proof of citizenship, even though the courts have been, I think, pretty clear on that. Local control is a mantra that I hear a lot from my Republican colleagues. Doesn't seem to be very consistent, however. So if we look at it, we're looking whether it's the LGBTQ community, if you're looking at the bathroom bill, which I can think of so many things that are more important to our state than dealing with this issue right now, but it's become this tremendous hot button issue. So that's something that's already been filed, as you probably know. And there's several other things. If you look at the city's ability to tax at a certain rate before it goes to the voters, now they want to lower that amount, the percentage amount before they have to go to the voters, essentially limiting the ability for cities to raise revenue in a time when Republicans the leadership certainly on the Senate side is talking, constantly, cutting programs and everything else and making it more and more difficult for cities to do their jobs. And then, of course, sanctuary cities, which is another issue as well, essentially saying that the city decides, and there's several cities that are thinking about that, and Austin being one of them, to say that we're not going to allow, our police force is not the Border Patrol. We're not going to be asking everybody for their proof of citizenship just randomly. That's not our job. Basically, what's going to happen, what the state wants to do is say, no, that's a requirement. You cannot be a city that doesn't do that. Make sure that people that are here are in fact citizens. And if you look at the rhetoric from Washington and from the president-elect, then this is something that we really have to be concerned about. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is just the Senate versus the House. So the House and Senate have always had a very interesting dynamic as far as working together or against each other, if depending. But in many cases, over the last couple of sessions, the Senate has become much more conservative than the Texas House has been. And so what that has done essentially is it makes for a very interesting kind of game of chess on how we deal with each other. The Senate is going to probably be inclined to pass as many of these bills that they really want as fast as possible, right, to kind of force the hand of the House Republicans to vote on some of these things sooner than later. So time is the friend of the more moderate people in the House, people that don't want to see these bad bills. So time is our friend and time is their enemy. So that's been kind of the chess game that's been played the last two sessions. And this session is going to be no exception in the sense that I believe that the Senate's going to try to kick out as many of these bills that we all think are not good for the state of Texas, going to try to kick them out as fast as possible, and then it's going to force the hand of the House to try to deal with that as quickly as, to try to deal with that and make sure it doesn't pass. So I've been really honored to serve on some great committees, and I'm on the Calendars Committee, which really is it's the committee that determines which bills go before the body, the entire House, and I've served on that committee for the last two sessions. I hope to be on that committee again, and I'll do my part there as much as I can, and on any committee that I happen to serve to try to stop some of these bills from getting before the House. Now, if these bills get before the House for all members to vote on, then all bets are off, and then we just don't know what's going to happen, essentially. And that's when I rely on people like you to the extent that you have the time to show up and go to committee hearings and let people know how you feel about this, to be there in the House chamber, letting people know how you feel, being there when if there are rallies or any other kind of demonstration of our opposition to this. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it makes a big difference, and at the end of it, it almost doesn't matter that you being in that committee hearing, at the end of that committee hearing, that the result that you wanted didn't happen. It's about showing up. And I believe that wholeheartedly, because people like myself and Donna Howard and others of this delegation, and we have a great delegation, we rely on you to give us that support. And because it's hard enough to fight against some of this stuff, much less fighting it alone. So I encourage you all to be a part of the process. This coming session, we're going to need you. So I want to open it up for questions, and I think we still have some time. So I'd love to hear from you guys.
We have 30 minutes left for question and answers. So please keep your questions short and to the point for Representative Rodriguez to have them so that he can answer as many questions as possible. And hold up your hands and we'll recognize you.
I live in southwest Austin in Circle C, and that's an area that used to be kind of deep red, semi-rural, and it's now gone purple and trending blue. And yet, because of gerrymandering, our representatives don't really represent us. Mm-hmm. Is there any possibility that gerrymandering is going to be corrected in the near future decade?
Yeah. Well, that is a really important question. There's so many issues to talk about. There's no way I could have talked about everything. I do believe that redistricting and campaign finance are the two biggest things that could change our politics. I believe that 100%. Now, what's happening in Southwest Austin and Travis County is just simply that I think the Republican Party, this is my opinion, of course, the Republican Party is getting too far to the right for Travis County folks. Whether they may identify as Republican, but the Republican Party is getting too far to the right for them. So I think that's why you're seeing that shift. I've been a proponent, and I support it, and I may still file a bill that would have a commission, a bipartisan or nonpartisan commission to kind of draw the lines. I sued the state of Texas, Rick Perry specifically, on behalf of our congressional map here in Travis County. We're still waiting on a ruling there. It's been now 4 or 5 years, at least 4 years on that, and we're still waiting on them to redraw that map. It's really important. The answer to your question is I don't know, because I tell you something. The Republicans wanted to change the way redistricting was done when Democrats were in control. And now the Republicans are in control. The last thing they want to do is change that up. I think that would have to be, maybe have to be won in the courts to the best that we can. And I think, voter ID and the redistricting process, you can still be challenged, and so it could be corrected on the judicial level if they pack minorities into a district and so on and so forth. It's very interesting because if you look at it, the courts have already said it's kind of like it is a partisan type of process, and they kind of let the states do what they want to do. But as you find that minorities self-identify more with one party over another party, so when you start packing Democrats into one district, you are also essentially packing minorities into a single district, and that's not constitutional. So we've seen a lot of things. I really think a lot of it's going to be fought in the courts. I do long for the day when we have a way of doing redistricting in a nonpartisan way. I benefit from the redistricting process now. My district is in the 70s as Democrat easily, right? Now, I think I can still win if my district was 54% Democrat. I think I could still win. I think I represent my district that way. But just like my district 70-some, I can't remember exactly, 70-some odd percent Democrat, there's a Republican district that's the same. And we get comfortable with that. Some people do. I would be fine with having, if you can find that many Republicans in Travis County, then I'd be fine taking that on a little bit, But that's a great question. It's an important question.
Okay, my name is Elizabeth Scrippen-Wheeler, and I'm a professor of English at Texas State, and I live here in Austin. One of the concerns I have as a citizen is whether there is legislative interest at all in modifying the laws that govern how university employees can participate at the legislature. Currently, we're under restrictions that if we have any classes or meetings at all on a particular day, we cannot come and testify at a hearing involving higher education. And we often hear when I visit the Capitol on other times, well, we have these higher ed bills, but we don't hear from faculty.
Right.
And we want to tell them, but we're prohibited from showing up. I can't finish my classes and then come up to testify in the afternoon, or vice versa. If I have a faculty meeting on a Monday and no other classes, I can't go to the legislature and testify on that day if there's a hearing. And many of us, I would think that this would be nonpartisan, although I will put an asterisk on that. But still, that is my concern.
No, that's a great question. First of all, I didn't know that was a statewide thing, or if that's university by university. If that's statewide, I did not know that. And let's have a conversation after this, and let's look at filing a bill. I'd be happy to do that. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. Frankly, it's just another way for the legislature, and sometimes trying to limit people's participation. That's been a part of the legislature for a long time. I mean, whether it's intentional or not, just the way. I mean, frankly, we have some very important hearings that start at 10 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, right? And you make it very difficult for people to go. So you find the only people that can go, you have a certain type of person that can make it out there, right? And you can't. I filed an amendment to the rules just on Tuesday to allow people to have written testimony that they can do online, right? That would be part of the record. That didn't make it through. So that's very interesting. The answer to your question is I didn't know that, and let's try to see what we can do to address that, 'cause I think you have a very good complaint there.
I have a question about Child Protective Services and hopefully reform thereof. I hear people on both sides espousing this. We need to change. It's terrible. But where will the money come from? Taxes are constantly being cut. It seems like this is a hollow gesture.
Well, no, I think there's always money. Let's say so. If the will is there, you find the money, and where you find the money, you don't necessarily raise the taxes. I mean, you could do it that way, or you just shuffle money around, right? Other agencies will get less, right? Other important issues or whatever will get less money, so that you can pay for that. There could be a raising of some fees here and there. Who knows? But you find a way to do it. If the will is there, it's there. The legislature is interesting. We can have a surplus of $10 billion, $50 billion, and you're going to find another excuse not to put money into something that's needed. And when there's $10 billion less, you'll find another reason why you can't do it. I mean, it's really up to, if the will of the legislature is there, and in this case, I think it's there on both sides of the aisle, the money will be found. It's just a matter of now, how much do you want to reimburse these caseworkers? And they're tremendously overworked, and they have a really important job. And the turnover is just incredible. It's no wonder that some of these kids can't, they have such a difficult life and time. So the answer is just simply, it's a reshuffling of the funds. That's what will happen. Or, frankly, you could use a rainy day fund possibly for some of that as well.
A question regarding tactics in the legislature. These bills, and you mentioned one of them, the bathroom bill, there are a number of those on social or other types of hot button issues that probably won't get anywhere, but cause a great deal of delay and confusion and redirection of resources. Mm-hmm. Are those in many cases simply tactical maneuvers to avoid something? Are they really important to the legislator?
Well, I would say it's probably important to some legislators. I mean, I think it would be disingenuous for me to say some people don't care about this. I've talked to some of my colleagues about it, and they really think it's a very important issue. I think it's more of a partisan tactic. I think it's not to avoid, necessarily to avoid other issues, so that's part of it, but I think it's more of a partisan tactic. It's a way to kind of draw this bright line. and probably affects more one side of the aisle than the other. I don't know of a single Democrat that, in the House that thinks this should be in the top 10 of any priority whatsoever. But it's a bright line that's there. These social issues have always been that way. If you had asked me 2 years ago, 4 years ago, that we're going to be debating this, I would never have guessed it in a million years. Now, I promise you this, when this fades, next session is going to be some other social issue that I can't even think about what it is. In a way, it is a way to delay and, not to get, really to address some other really important issues that we all face. But it is, again, I think more of a bright line on how conservative one is, right? That's my take on it. I could be wrong. I mean, at some point in time, we have to face some of these major issues. We face transportation. That's one of the things we've done, maybe not to the degree that I would like to have seen it, but we've actually addressed it the last 2 sessions. We'll address some of these issues. CPS, we're going to do that to some level, right? Public ed, I wish that we would do more there. If the Supreme Court had said something different, said you have to do something, then we would do something. But I really think these kind of social issues are meant for a bright line, really to affect one side of the aisle over the other. That's my take on it.
Can you elaborate a little more on possibilities for school finance reform, and is there any chance of the legislature considering other ways of generating revenue? I guess the Supreme Court decision was a setback in a way.
I think the Supreme Court decision was a big setback. The moment that decision came out, it, to me, signaled that the legislature is not going to do anything substantial, right? Because they don't have to. I think the best we can maybe hope for is some tweaking of the formulas on how we do that, I think that might be it. Austin's in a very precarious position, and I'm very sensitive to AISD's problem, but at the same time, I think the challenge for being a legislator, really, if you sit down and think about it, our challenge really is to look at our district and the interests of our district and how it fits in the puzzle of the entire state, right? And so if you look at the school finance system that we have now and recapture and all that kind of stuff, recapture was put there, I know this goes a little bit away from your question, but recapture was put there to try to equalize school funding as much as possible. The problem with the formulas right now is a lot of it is with districts like Austin, and in many ways Austin is very unique. There isn't really another district quite like it. You have over 60% of the students qualifying for free reduced lunch, yet we're sending back $200 million to the state of Texas to go to schools that legitimately need that money. But we have this system in place where property values really kind of dictate the amount of money you have and frankly how much money you give away. And that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality on the ground for the district. So I think I would like to see some changes in the formulas that could adjust that a little bit, that could help districts like AISD, and again, I think AISD is really unique, keep a little bit more of that money and to really utilize for the massive need that we have, right? We have a lot of low-income kids, a lot of kids, English as a second language is really important. We need that. We need to keep a little bit of that money. I don't want to see the school district ever get to a point where we're saying that recapture is bad and just try to do away with it, because I don't know if that's right either.
Texas is a very energy-rich state, rich in fossil fuel, and also coming up fast in terms of renewable energy. My question is how much support there is in the legislature for increasing our share of the renewable energy market, and how much support is still in place for fossil fuels?
Yeah, well, support for fossil fuels is high, it always has been. However, we are the leader in wind energy, and we should be proud of that, right? Really the next step is how do we promote as much solar as we can, right? And that's come under a little bit of fire under the legislature, as far as it's a relatively small amount of the energy that we produce. Not under fire, what I should say is that hasn't been promoted, supported, I should say, as much as wind has. And there's lots of different reasons for that, right? But I think we're I wouldn't say we're moving quickly away from fossil fuels, but there is an obvious it makes a lot of sense, economic sense, to promote renewable. And right now, that happens to be predominantly wind. We have a ton of it, but we also have a ton of capability or capacity for solar. And I think I've been pushing that. There's been some other measures that have kind of limited the ability. I mean, a lot of these new technologies, we always do this, and you'll find in the legislature that there's people that say we don't want to, give a handout to corporations and companies. Well, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but we do that all the time. Then my favorite thing to hear, other than local control from some of my colleagues, is we don't want to pick winners and losers. Well, every single day we're picking a winner and picking a loser. So I think I like to see us really take seriously how we can promote and encourage local, meaning Texas, solar companies, as much as possible to have them be a part of the grid, right? To be part of our energy, grid and what we're using. I don't think we're going to ever go quickly, fully away from oil and gas, but I think if the other stuff really starts to pick up, it will just naturally maybe have a little bit more of a balance.
And I have a question about future funding for legal aid. I hear that it's being cut, and it scares me.
One of the things that happen when you have a shortfall like we have, which is it's substantial. It's not the worst that I've seen since I've been in office. There's kind of this demand to cut 3% or whatever the percentage right across the board, and legal aid is no exception, right? So it's really up to our friends initially that are in appropriations committee to try to block any serious attempts to gut that, because it's critically important. I'm with you 100% on that. So the front lines is the appropriations committee, and the front line, that would mean when they meet and if there's opportunity for you to testify or just to talk to members of that committee, be that person here from your district or outside your district, talk to them about the importance of that and lobby that. And when it comes to the debates on the floor, then we'll have to figure out how to, if it's been cut substantially, then we'll have to figure out how to do that. But the answer to your question essentially is that I think nothing is really that sacred when you have a deficit like we have right now. And so we have to just keep an eye on it and fight for it.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more on your community schools bill. Specifically, would these schools who are changing over be under the Texas public school system, or could they possibly go through a charter school? No,
it would stay in the public school system, is the way that would work. It's really just a model of how to do things. That's really all it is. There's a lot to it, and Eric's right here to be my crutch in case I miss some stuff. But it really is, it's about wraparound services, it's about parental engagement, the faculty engagement, engagement with the community college. It's just to have everything centralized and focused on that campus to keep kids there and give them everything they need so that they don't miss class, or even if it comes to food security, right? There's going to be maybe a day or two in the week that they'll be able to take home some food. Or they might have after-school training for the parents, right? Job training for the parents, so that they can maybe better their situation. It's just a model is what it is. I don't envision it. Obviously, the state would not take that over. It's a way for the state not to close a school down or take it over or send it to a charter, in my view. That's what I would want. Charter schools have their place. I'm not going to say every one of them is bad, because they're not. But the goal of my bill, and I think the model itself, is to improve our public school, an individual public school campus, and then by default improving a district. Not default, but by extension, the district.
Thank you. You briefly touched on this transgender bathroom issue. I would like you to speak a little more about it. Mr. Dan Patrick said it is a public safety issue. That is crazy. It is not. You go into a bathroom, the stalls are locked. If you felt threatened, you could probably find a handicapped room, a single room. It's not a safety issue, but yet he's going to bring that up. This is not a problem in other countries. Why is it a problem in this country? Please comment. And in this crazy state of Texas.
Yeah. The great state of Texas, but it's not a problem. The answer to your question is that it's not a problem. It's an attempt to, in my view, to go after the LGBTQ community. That's what it is. School districts, school campuses, any business, any facility can determine what they want to do in a situation like this. I don't think it's the place of the government, right? I mean, I thought Republicans, and Dan Patrick particularly, was for small government, to say, okay, everyone has to do this the same way. I mean, listen, if a male wanted to go to a woman's restroom, there's a crime committed there somewhere along the way. Something's going to happen to that person. The public safety aspect of it is just, it's a red herring. It's just a way to make it more than what it really is. Because if you say it's about transgender people, then you kind of lose a lot of people that way, support. And I don't particularly think this issue has a lot of support statewide, frankly. I think the business community is very much against it. You just have a really small handful of people that think this is an issue. And we'll just, have to fight it like we do a lot of other stuff. But I think in this particular case, ma'am, we have some coalition. I mean, you have people that, progressive legislators, you have the business community that are opposed to this, and, just regular old folk who just don't think this is a very important issue. So we'll just have to, see how it goes from there.
I'm a mostly retired dietitian, but I work part-time in a low-income clinic in Austin, and I see kids, with prediabetes and high triglycerides, a lot of things. Some of them are in charter schools, and I'll get the diet that they ate in the charter school versus what they're eating in public school, and I've only found one time that I would say that the lunch in a charter school looked pretty good to me. On the whole, I'm appalled. And I wondered if the charter schools are held to the national school lunch policy and what we could do to maybe increase the quality of the diet that's given in these schools.
Yeah. Well, I've never been one to admit when I don't know the answer to something. So I don't know if they do, if the charter schools do or not. But I'll find that out. I'd like to know. One thing, looking at AISD, for example, is doing something interesting. They're looking at trying to have kind of more organic and local food in their schools, which is really important. And I think we can try to promote that around the state as much as possible. Cleaner food. I mean, non-biotic, anti-amebiotic, meats and whatnot, organic vegetables and whatever else. I've always been a strong proponent, again, as I mentioned earlier, of like urban farms. I'd like to see some of our urban farms grow food for schools. Maybe AISD, for example, has a lot of property. The city of Austin has a lot of property. Travis County has a lot of property to see about growing food for the city and particularly for our schools. I like to see something like that be promoted as much as possible. As far as the charter schools, I need to look into that. I'm not sure. But, that's something that we, when schools start, especially large school districts, start to demand organic and healthier and cleaner food, you're going to start seeing that, right? The market changes. Because the money issue, absolutely right. So AISD, when I met with them actually probably November or so, and they're looking right now at even a national search, if they can, for someone to provide healthier, cleaner food. And someone in Texas, I'm sure, and certainly there are probably companies in Texas, but if you want this contract, which is a lot of money, you're going to figure out a way to provide organic and healthier, cleaner food. And I think I want to see, and I was told, I don't know this for sure, that Dallas ISD is even looking at doing something like this. So if you start having Austin, Dallas, Houston, the Rio Grande Valley, or other larger school districts doing this, then I think that's that momentum to make it better.
I am a retired teacher, 5 years now, and over the course of that time, the monthly payments cumulatively have maybe gone up $1, $1.50. So that would be our cost of living increase. And according to the Texas Retired Teachers Association, our insurance payments are going to go up a lot, according to studies that have been done. And you've talked about how there's no money, but then there's money, but probably not. Anyway, I wanted to get your point of view of what you think will be done, or what your stance would be on supporting retired teachers.
Sure, and I would increase the cost of living increase. I would definitely be for it. I think when you look at insurance payments, we should probably add to that as the insurance goes up. We should try to help with that too. I've long been a proponent of that. I served on the pensions committee a while back, and that was one of my focuses was helping retired teachers as much as possible on that cost of living increase and making sure that goes up. Partially selfishly too, because I have a lot of family members that are retired teachers, and they constantly talk to me about that. So that was one of the things that I was focusing on too. But your question was partially like there's money, there's no money, all that other kind of stuff. Again, it has to become a priority it could be a priority for me, but is it a priority for the body as a whole to promote that and push that? And I don't know. I mean, I know that I'll be supporting that, promoting that. But it's something that we have to do as we have more retired teachers out there, we have to try to help them out. And the cost of living has to be part of that because it's getting more and more expensive to be around. So I support it. I'll fight for it. We'll see what we get this coming session.
The one thing that seems to be escaping people is the affordability issue. Mm-hmm. The affordability of, for example, electric vehicles. You're talking about 2 cents a mile to drive an electric vehicle. Solar panels and wind now are cheaper than fossil fuels. No one seems to recognize that, and they don't have all of the negative impacts of water pollution and so on. Yet the state still continues to subsidize one and negate the other. We have cities and regions that are cancer alleys because of pollution of chemicals and petrochemical industry. When will the state, I know that they're talking about doing away with the Clean Power Plan that Obama had proposed. Yet something like a carbon fee and dividend could make a huge difference so that polluters don't get to pollute for free. Is there a group of legislators that really think polluting for free is okay and fair to the health of our Texans?
Well, I mean, when it's put that way, sir, no. Of course, you're not going to find anybody that would say that. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm also, I also serve on the chair of I'm vice chair of the Environmental Regulation Committee, so that's something that I pay close attention to. And the clean energy, bill would have been, assuming that doesn't get overturned, the clean energy plan, I should say. It's a good question. All of it, I think, when you get down to the debate about it, a lot of it centers around just jobs. There's more jobs in the oil and gas industry than you would find, and that's what is being said. I'm saying they'll say there's more jobs in certain parts of the state, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, I think that we do need to subsidize to a similar level, or at least to some degree, what we do in the oil and gas industry when it comes to renewable energy, right? Because in the long term, it's better for the state in terms of health, which is a big deal. The thing that we need to start doing is looking at truly at the total cost. When you don't do something, when you have a lot of pollution, there's an increase in healthcare costs, right? That the state will bear some of that. Certainly local governments will bear some of that. When we have a clearer picture of all the different costs that it really has if you don't do something else, then, I think you get a better picture of it. Even, you're right, you mentioned electric vehicles. I mean, I worked on legislation in the past 2 sessions, trying to kind of help Tesla out, trying to get something out in the market to go around the system of dealership model that we have now. And, one of the complaints that I've even said to them was, okay, well, when you're going to come up with a car that the working person can afford to get? There's all of these things, all of these other renewable type products is more expensive. If I want to put solar on my house, there's a program at the city of Austin, for example, but I got to come up with some cash on the front end before I can see the benefit of it. So it's not really accessible to a lot of people. And I think there is a role for the state there, and that is to help subsidize that, to help these companies be able to provide this type of energy cheaper. And so, I support that 100%.
Yes, and that's our final question. I'd like to ask you, in light of all these issues that have been raised about the fiscal state of Texas, will the legislature continue to fund for, I believe, $800 million, that border security program?
It's a very good
who primarily their greatest success has been writing speeding tickets in the valley. And so will they continue to fund that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I know being from the Valley, I hear it all the time when I go home, is you have all these DPS officers that are writing tickets, and they're just basically stopping people because they may look like they're not legal. I don't know how they would determine that, right? I don't know. I mean, recently, there was some Republican legislators came together, held a press conference after the first day of session, asking the federal government to reimburse the state for the $800 million that we spent. Now, I don't know if that'll happen. That could happen. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But that tells me that maybe the appetite for spending that much money every 2 years or so is not quite there. Let's let the feds do, which is what I said, and many Democrats, frankly, said, was that's not our role to do that. We should be using this money for something else. That's actually that's a role that the federal government should have, right? That Border Patrol should have. And feds should give more money to Border Patrol for that. So we'll see. When you have a shortfall like this, it's going to be a lot easier to say we don't have the money for that anymore. That's true.
We have about 2 minutes left.
Sure.
Shirley Weiler. My impression is that there was a battle in the education department. I don't know if it's your perimeter or not, but it seems to be a battle between fundamentalist religious groups and people who believe in science and rationality. I just wonder what's the status of that, and do you have any input into that area?
Are you talking about the Board of Education, State Board of Education? Well, that goes back to the redistricting question. Those are districts, and so they run in these areas, and a lot of them run very far to the right. I testified, in fact, against a book about Hispanic history, and I testified that some of the stuff in there was not only wrong but offensive, and I'm not thin-skinned, but this is just totally offensive. And she's, doesn't even believe in public education, but she's on she's on the board. I think that's a product of redistricting. I think you have a lot of really good people on the board that believe in science, that believe that public education should be separate and apart from any kind of moral agenda, and they're good people on that board. We just need more of them, to say that. So it's an elected body. We tried, there's been some bills in the previous sessions to make it less partisan, right? To not even have kind of run in districts, to have a little more of a pointed thing at some point. There's lots of different ideas to try to address that, but as long as more Republicans are winning those seats, the Republicans probably don't want to change it. But there's many legislators that'll be testifying against really crazy stuff that some of them want to do, and we'll just keep doing that.
Representative Rodriguez, thank you very much for your presentation and for your good work.